di webinar kami di Pusat Studi Desentralisasi dan Pembangunan Partisipatif. Sore ini kita kembali bertemu di acara mingguan webinar Pusdi kami, dan seperti biasa saya bertugas untuk memberikan pembukaan dalam acara ini. Kami akan memperkenalkan sedikit saja mengenai Pusdi kami yang bernama Pusdi Desentralisasi dan Pembangunan Partisipatif yang berada di bawah Fakultas Ilmu Sosial dan Ilmu Politik Universitas Padjadjaran. Kami bekerja dengan fokus pada isu-isu pembangunan dari berbagai perspektif. Kegiatan kami antara lain research, konsultansi, internship, seminar, dan juga workshop. Jadi seminar ini adalah bagian dari kegiatan-kegiatan yang bisa kami lakukan selama pandemi ini. Kami memiliki berbagai partner di dalam dan di luar negeri. Ini adalah sebagian kecil dari partner yang pernah bekerja dengan kami, beberapa instansi pemerintah dan juga universitas di Australia seperti Flinders, kemudian University of New South Wales dan juga University of South Africa. Kemudian ada banyak sekali organisasi yang lain yang ada di web kami. Mungkin Bapak Ibu suatu saat boleh berkunjung ke website kami yang saat ini memang sedang diperbaiki. Nah, beberapa proyek yang pernah kami lakukan diantaranya adalah riset-riset untuk kegiatan di Jawa Barat dan juga di Kota Bandung. Lalu proyek yang sekarang sedang berlangsung dilakukan oleh para anggota di Pusdi ini, diantaranya kebetulan ini perempuan semua, itu ada Ibu Ida, Ibu Carol, Ibu Titi, Bina Hayati Rusyidi, dan saya sendiri. Dan proyek-proyek kami didanai oleh berbagai sumber, baik dari pemerintah maupun non-pemerintah. Most recent publication yang kami punya, ini yang terbaru ditulis oleh Ibu Carol dan timnya tentang konstruksi kewargaan dalam perbincangan di Twitter, dan juga sebuah publikasi di jurnal internasional yang ditulis oleh Ibu Carol dan timnya. Selain publikasi di jurnal-jurnal internasional, kami juga mengelola saat ini jurnal kami sendiri yang bernama Kumawula, jurnal pengabdian kepada masyarakat. Mungkin Bapak Ibu bisa turut berkontribusi di dalam publikasi jurnal kami ini. Seperti tadi sudah saya jelaskan bahwa kami memiliki beberapa seri seminar, yaitu Research Method dan juga Policy Research. Ini adalah past seminars yang telah kami lakukan beberapa minggu yang lalu dengan dua narasumber, keduanya dari Australia juga. Lalu juga kami pernah menyelenggarakan Policy Research, baru minggu kemarin kami bekerja sama dengan Prof. Taiwonam dari Korea Selatan, mungkin di antara Bapak Ibu juga menjadi peserta di minggu lalu. Dan minggu depan kami juga masih memiliki seri tentang research method mengenai metode analisis wacana kritis. Apabila Bapak Ibu berminat untuk join, bisa daftar. Kami akan share flyernya setelah acara ini. Dan spesial untuk hari ini, kita akan mengikuti webinar series metode research seri ketiga dengan judul Mixed Method Research from a Transformative Point of View bersama Profesor Norma Rom dari Universitas South Africa. Dan acara ini akan dipandu oleh Ibu Ida Widyaningsih sebagai moderator. Baik, mungkin saya tidak perlu berpanjang lebar. We say thank you to Professor Norman Rom for being our speaker today and sharing your expertise with us. Saya akan serahkan waktunya kepada Ibu Ida Widyaningsih selaku moderator. Demikian Bapak Ibu, selamat datang, selamat mengikuti webinar. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mangga Ibu Ida, silakan.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Erna sudah mengantarkan seminar ini. Baik, selamat siang semuanya. Terima kasih sudah bergabung kembali bersama kami pada webinar series terkait dengan metode riset. Hari ini kita kedatangan tamu Profesor Norma Rom yang kebetulan adalah mitra riset saya untuk riset yang bicara tentang isu ketahanan air. Profesor Norma Rom, sebelum kita mulai, saya perkenankan saya membacakan dulu curriculum vitae oleh Profesor Norma Rom. Norma, sorry, sometimes speaking in different language. I'd like to. I just let me read very quick your curriculum vitae. Professor Norma Rom work at the adult basic education, School of Education and Studies, the University of South Africa. She's actually the research professor of the university. She got her degree in literature philosophy, and then in the University of South Africa, and also MA in sociology at the University of Cape Town, and also BA in sociology in the University of South Africa. So she's actually one of the proponents of transformative research method, and she wrote so many books and journals in the area of transformative research. Some of the her books, for example, the methodologies of positivism and Marxism, and some other books. You can find her profile in Google Scholars and also in ResearchGate. So there are too many things to read. So many books and also articles and chapters in books. And we are also currently writing a book with Professor Janet McIntyre Mills that will be published hopefully by the end of this year. So Professor Norma, let me share your PowerPoint presentation. You will have time for about 30 to 45 minutes, but as you said, you can have some break after 25 minutes and get some questions from the participants. And for the participants, as usual, you can post the questions in the chat room. I have my team to record the question and pass it to me. And also for those who are actually now listening to us in the live streaming on our YouTube channel, you also can ask some question, and then my assistant will pass the question to me as well. So we will try to address your questions, and hopefully you enjoy the lecture. Professor Norma, you can have your time. Thank you.
Right, thank you. So I suppose everybody can hear me if I talk like this. Is this good?
Yes, very good. We can hear you.
Good, fine. So my first slide, which you see here, is the topic of today's webinar. And like Ida said, I'm at the University of South Africa, and this webinar is being organized through the Center for Decentralization and Participatory Development in Indonesia. So now, Ida, you can get on to the next slide.
Oh, 1 second. Oh, sorry. I forgot that I have to move this like this. Okay.
Right. So what I'll be talking about today is mixed methods research from a transformative point of view, but I don't completely know how much this audience knows about mixed methods research. So I'm going to start off by talking about mixed methods research. I hope that that will make sense to the audience. And then after about 25 minutes, I'm going to ask Ida to collect the questions, and then we can talk around issues that you want to speak about, and then I'll move on further to more slides. But I thought it's good to have a little break in between, so I'll also get a sense of what you as the audience are interested in. But in the meanwhile, I'll start with a starting definition of mixed methods research, and quoting Ongwegbuzi and Leach. By the way, the slides, I suppose, will be available eventually to everyone, and then you'll see the references at the end of the slides. But these people, Ongwegbuzi and Leach, define mixed methods research by saying, conducting mixed methods research involves collecting, analyzing, and interpreting quantitative and qualitative data in a single study or series of studies. So the idea is to collect different types of data and then to analyze and interpret them either in a single study or in a series of studies. Now, this is a bit different from multiple research approaches, which do not necessarily include a quantitative and a qualitative component. So for instance, you could have simply multiple quantitative methods used in a particular study, like a survey and experiments or some other methods of counting. And in a multiple qualitative study, you can have focus groups and interviews, for instance. That would still be called multiple research approaches, but not necessarily combining quantitative and qualitative methods. So that is a difference. By the way, there's a journal called the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, and there's another journal called the Journal of Multiple Research Approaches. So that just shows the difference. Can you take the next slide now, Ida? So again, as I say, I'm not sure of this audience, but I'll just give a little bit of a story about what quantitative research implies, and later what qualitative research implies, and what it might mean to combine these types of research. Quantitative research is based on numbers. That's the quickest definition of it. You're looking for numerical measures of concepts or statistical tests of material. And so, for instance, you might be interested, I've just seen when the Erna was having her talk and showing all the projects in your research center, that one of them was on gender-based violence and water insecurity. Now, let us say that we're looking to check variables in social life, which is what quantitative research is about. A variable is something that can vary and you can measure its variation. So for instance, you can measure the income in the workplace earned by women and by men for the same type of work. So you could ask people in a questionnaire about their income, and of course you can check whether they're women or men. You first ask them whether they're a man or a woman, then you ask them about their income, or you could look at statistical records in firms and see for the similar type of work who is earning more. But the basic idea is that you're looking for numbers, and you're looking to look at, it's called relationships between variables. For instance, a variable of gender, which is either man or woman, and
I see. Oh, okay.
do women earn more than men? What is the relationship? So now the idea is that you're relying primarily on the logic of deduction to test hypotheses. Again, I'm talking a bit in the dark because I don't know what this audience knows in terms of this idea of testing hypotheses through the logic of deduction. But the general idea is that you might have some theory that you want to test. For instance, there's a theory in the social sciences called social dominance theory, which suggests that different groups of people in the society dominate others. So for instance, you could argue that a group has been developed in terms of men as a social group and women as a social group. It's a social category, but that, you know, the social dominance theory might say that this is one of the groups that dominate others, that men dominate women, and, you know, other people, they could have other bases of domination based on class, based on ethnicity, based on many criteria, disability even. So you could argue that there's a kind of dominance in the society. Now, the idea is that you've got some theory, and then you develop a hypothesis based on the theory. So now your hypothesis might be, based on this theory of domination, that you can expect that if there is gender domination in the society, you can expect women will earn less than men. Then you go out into the world and you so-called test the hypothesis through empirical means. Like I mentioned earlier, you know, you might check the records of firms or ask people in questionnaires about their income. And in that way, you can so-called test the hypothesis. But there's one other point I want to make, is that this is normally associated with what's called post-positivism, where you use deduction to test hypotheses. But you're not presuming that you can ever fully verify a hypothesis. Again, I don't know how much you know about this, but early positivism suggested that you can actually verify hypotheses with reference to the facts. But a person called Karl Popper invented this idea that the logic of science actually is deduction. And through deduction, you can't ever prove a hypothesis to be true. All you can do is look at the empirical world, and if it looks like you can corroborate the hypothesis, you can call it tentatively corroborated. And the way you do it is by setting up a hypothesis and then testing it many times with reference to lots of data. But that's the logic of post-positivism, and it relies a lot on quantitative research to so-called test hypotheses. Now, qualitative research is not interested so much in looking for relationships between variables or looking at numerical findings. It's much more interested in in-depth exploration of how people in the social world construct ideas, construct concepts, construct categories, and how they interact in terms of this. So it's interested in the meaning that people give to concepts, even like the meaning of woman, the meaning of man, the meaning of work, the meaning of work outside the home, the meaning of work, like lots of women who work, we know, inside the home doing lots of work. Is this work valued? How do people regard that kind of work? So it's the meanings that people give to ideas in the social world. It's actually called constructions. And that is what is of interest to qualitative researchers. They want to see, how do people develop meaning? How do meanings change? For instance, has the meaning of woman and man changed over time? That we now realize, you know, that you don't have to have this clear-cut division between women and man, as if women have specific characteristics and men have specific characteristics and tendencies, but that you know, these are open to re-exploration, and these shift in the society as people see women in different roles and see men in different roles. And so it's interested in how categories in social life, like even gender categories, any category, how they change and shift, and what that means in terms of the social relationships between people. So these studies are considered as exploratory, meaning you're exploring the way in which people construct meanings. And that is often associated with what's called a constructivist approach. Can we go on to the next, because it's looking at social constructions. Can we go on to the next slide, Ida? So I've tried to explain that there are different logics of inquiry, or some people argue, not yet, not the pragmatism yet, either the logics of inquiry, the one earlier where you were just now, you were one up, the logics of inquiry, you've gone to the next slide, this one, yes, that one more down, one down to the logics of inquiry.
Okay.
Go one down, there, no. A few down, not this one. Not, no, you need to get to the one on one up if you can get there, Ida. No, yeah. One up. The logics of inquiry.
Yeah, in a second. Sorry, I couldn't see. And I had to.
Not there. No, you're going down. You want to go backwards.
This one? No.
No. Much higher, Ida. We want to get to the third slide.
Third slide. Sorry.
Yeah, third slide. You're on about the 10th one now. You want to go to the the logics. Yeah. Stop here now. No.
Another one. Sorry.
One more down.
This one.
After quantitative and qualitative. Yes. Stop here. Stop. All right. So now, some people argue, as I've tried to explain just now, that these different methods imply different logics of inquiry. So for instance, as I said earlier, the quantitative methods is traditionally associated with post-positivism. That's the Popperian argument about using research to test hypotheses which refer to relationships between variables that can be measured. And qualitative research is associated with a different logic of inquiry, which is called interpretivism or constructivism, where one is talking to people, listening to their words. It's not based on picking up numbers and analyzing them statistically. It's based on listening to people, listening to their words, interacting with people. And that is a different logic of inquiry. So now the question is, if these different logics of inquiry that guide research and that guide quantitatively and qualitatively directed research are very different. Can we combine them? And this is a question that I already raised with another author called Flood. He's actually the series editor of the book that Ida just mentioned is going to be published at the end of the year. But anyway, we raised this question of whether one can combine these, they're called paradigms like post-positivism or constructivism, whether you can combine the paradigms in a single study. And now the next one, Ida, next slide, just one slide down. Yes, and some people argue that the way in which we can justify bringing together these very different approaches is by saying that they have their respective virtues and limitations, meaning, you know, that some paradigms and some ways of conducting research have got strengths but also weaknesses, and the other way around. So post-positivism may have certain strengths in that it knows how to develop statistical tests to test hypotheses, and interpretive work has got its strength in that you have to learn how to interact with participants and listen carefully to their words and have interviews that depth in explorations of meanings in society. So they each have their strengths and weaknesses. And the idea is that you can combine the two, because then you'll better answer whatever your research question is, because you're drawing on the strengths of different approaches. That is a pragmatic argument. Next slide, Ida. Okay, stop here. Now, some people say that pragmatism may become too, the word is aphilosophical, meaning it hasn't got enough philosophical content. It just says we combine these methods and we believe that it'll work to better answer the research question. But now, some people argue, like Flood and Rom, that's me with Flood earlier, and there's some other names here that you could look up. And one of them is Mertens, who is actually the person who labeled the transformative paradigm. She also questions the pragmatic argument, and it's called even a pragmatic paradigm. And lots of people have questioned this idea that you can simply believe that you can mix methods pragmatically, meaning, you know, that you consider that it somehow works because you're answering your research question. And these authors argue that you can't just think you'll mix things together and hope for the best that you'll answer a research question. One of the issues is who even sets the research question. And this is a very important point that transformative researchers raise, which I'll explain also a little later, is that the way you pose research questions is never neutral in content. So you've got to be very careful as a transformative researcher as how you set a question that it's going to be meaningful to participants. And the other point is, which I'll also discuss much later, is that the transformative paradigm argues that you're trying to make research that is meaningful in that it's going to lead to more social justice. So ultimately, you're hoping to benefit people who are normally marginalized in the social fabric. Remember earlier I spoke of social dominance theory that says some groups dominate others. Now, the transformative paradigm is looking to use research to shift those patterns of domination, to try and help marginalized people, like often it's women, often it's ethnic groups that have been marginalized in society, often it's working class people who are poor, it's people who've got disabilities. So you're using your research question ultimately to be of benefit to those kinds of people in the society. So you've got to be very careful how you phrase the question. And the other issue is, how are participants involved? Are you simply going to ask them questions that you've constructed on the basis of something that interests you as a researcher? Or are you going to be looking to see what these, as I say, what these marginalized participants are finding problematic in their social life, and involving them in defining what should be researched and even how it should be researched? And also, the other issue is, how one presents research, so-called products, that one involves the audience, one involves the participants, one involves stakeholders to think through what these so-called findings mean, and even to question the status of the findings, which I'll also explain much later. So the idea is that you've got to be very reflective as a researcher. You can't just think, I'll set my research question, I'll go out and collect some data, and then I'll analyze the data, and hey presto, I'll have a research product. It's the transformative paradigm especially, and other people also, especially people in what's called the indigenous paradigm, which I'll also explain a little later. They are very clear that you've got to, as a researcher, be reflective about how you proceed with any research, ultimately with the aim of creating more social justice. And as I say, this will have to be explained much further later. Now, one other idea in the mixed methods community, and this is Mertens et al., they say that we can mix and we can combine even paradigms in the sense of allowing people to talk across the paradigms, learn from what the different paradigms can offer. But ultimately, the idea is that we must use research for transformative ends. And that's what transformative and indigenous paradigmatic researchers advocate, that you're using research for transformative ends. You actually explicitly and consciously decide to use research with that purpose. And often post-positivism and interpretivism don't necessarily believe that as a researcher, it's your job to be committed to action, if you want to put it like that, to transformative action. They think the only job of researchers, or lots of them believe, that the only job of researchers is to so-called do the research, find out something, and then it's up to other people if they want to use the findings. But the transformative and indigenous paradigms say, no, as researchers, we've got to take into account how we can use research itself so that it's going to be of benefit to people, and not just think we do researchers and let other people worry. Okay, I see there's a nice question here. Can we call gender transformative research transformative? Should I quickly answer that question? Ida? I see there's a question that came up on the screen. Can we call gender transformative research transformative? I think I will answer that. I saw it pop up on the screen. Should I answer that quickly? I don't hear you, Ida. Ida, I'm not hearing you.
Actually, there are some questions before your that question. So I think that you can continue first, because
okay, I'll continue first, and then we mustn't forget to talk about gender transformative research. Yes. And I've got a nice example actually. Okay, my confusion is that pragmatism has been all right. I think actually, Ida, I must look at some of these questions that one about pragmatism. Okay, right. I'm going to quickly answer this one. Choosing research method will depend on the research question. I'm going to just quickly say that the issue for transformative researchers is who sets the question and how do we set it. So, but we'll talk about that a little later. Yes, maybe you're choosing research questions, the research methods depends on the research question, but there's a first step, and that is to decide on the research question. And transformative researchers say we must set questions that are likely to be helpful for aiding participants who normally are marginalized in the social fabric. So the way of setting the research question is the first step. And then, yes, you'll choose methods. But the transformative paradigm also says, don't just think that as a researcher, you control the methods that are going to be used. You also have to actually seek advice from your participants, or at least some of them, on which methods you'll use and how you'll use them. So the idea of transformative research is that it's not all so-called researcher controlled, that the researcher thinks, this is of interest to me. I'm interested to learn about this. Therefore, I'm going to go and ask my research participants. I'll make a sample, and then I'll start asking my participants that issue. So the idea of transformative research is that it should not be fully or even mainly researcher controlled. The idea is to work with participants. But I'll explain that a little bit later. I'm pleased you've raised these points. That one about pragmatism. Let's just see that one about pragmatism, Ida. What was that one about pragmatism? Okay, something like interpretive perspective from the pragmatist paradigm. Right. Well, a pragmatist paradigm, by the way, basically says whatever works is acceptable. But so yes, you can use an interpretive perspective even within so-called pragmatic, with a pragmatic intent. And that would be, again, to say, well, this works for me. But the issue is, what does it mean to work? What does it mean that you've constructed a research process that is workable? And so while pragmatism says, do what works, the problem is how you're going to define what's working. Okay, Ida, let's get on to the next slide.
Okay.
Good. Yeah. So now, this is a very important slide, is that most people, I read once an article with Nguyen and some other authors, I've forgotten who, I think it was Burke Johnson and someone else. Okay, ontological and epistemological sides of pragmatism. All right, we'll do that one a little later. I'm seeing questions popping up on the scene. Right. What is very important, as I once read an article, as I say, by Johnson with, I think, about Nguyen with this guy called Burke Johnson and one other person. And they actually asked a lot of mixed methods researchers. It was research they did. They went and interviewed lots of mixed methods researchers and said to them, what's the purpose of mixed methods research? And most of these so-called big scholars in the mixed methods research community said, the idea is to provide a more comprehensive picture of reality. We're trying to develop a better picture of reality, let's put it like that, by comparing findings from different methods and by using the strengths of the different methods, we are able to get a more comprehensive picture of reality. And that was their argument for why you should use mixed methods research, because you're going to get a better picture of reality. But I actually, have criticized this in my book, which Ida mentioned, I think, on responsible research practice. That's my latest book, 2018. And I looked at those arguments about mixed methods research being that its main aim is to pick up a better picture of reality. And Mertens also questions this idea. Already in her 2011 article, she says, lots of people say we conduct research to create new knowledge. Remember I said earlier about lots of positivists and interpretivists say our job as a researcher is just to create knowledge. But Mertens questions this idea, and actually it goes even further than that. The idea is whether you even can ever so-called claim that you've created new knowledge by going out and so-called developing questions that you ask people to fill in a questionnaire or you interview people, whether you are able to create knowledge which is free of interpretation. That means free of your own values, free of how you as a researcher are seeing the world, free of values that you bring to the research. It's called, this idea of creating knowledge is often understood that you as a researcher must be, it's called value free, that you mustn't bring your own values. You must just go out and find out what's going on in the world. But lots of researchers, especially in the transformative tradition, it's often called the critical research tradition, the emancipatory research tradition, they argue we never can simply understand phenomena. We are always using some values as the basis for even going out and choosing methods, for even going out and setting questions for research participants. There's always some value behind it. And so now this is again Mertens saying researchers often justify that we'll choose methods because we'll better understand the phenomenon that we're studying. And we choose more than one method because we believe we'll understand better than if we use a single method. But Mertens questions this idea, and lots of people in the transformative tradition, in the emancipatory tradition, all question this idea that you even can so-called get a better understanding of phenomenon in a value-free manner. I see this person who put up on the screen about they're interested in the ontological and epistemological ideas behind pragmatism. Well, this is the problem, that pragmatism often doesn't think carefully about epistemology. And epistemology means, what are we doing when we think we're knowing? What does it mean to know? And according to the transformative paradigm, and as I say, lots of other people, especially in the indigenous community, also say that knowledge creation is often itself a struggle, that some people say this is how the world works, and some people say, no, this is what reality looks like. Some people say, no, that's not how it is. We need to realize that this is how reality functions. That there's contestation in the social world, and there's contestation in the research world about what we should take as being so-called knowledge, and even ways of developing knowledge. Some people say, no, the only way we can develop knowledge is if we adopt a value-free position, and we just go out into the world and we ask people questions in terms of our questionnaire, or we interview them and we find out what they're thinking, and we mustn't at all have any values, and then we'll understand the world better. But other researchers say, no. We mustn't even think that we're being neutral. We are never neutral. So we have to think what values we want to serve. And the transformative paradigm says we must serve values that are going to be in support of people who are marginalized. And there's another very important way of putting this that I also found in Mertens, which I'm not even sure she really understood the significance of the way she put it. She said, we are looking for versions of reality which are going to serve social justice. So we're not pretending we're finding out about reality. Remember that question of the person that said they're interested in ontology, and what does pragmatism define ontology as? Well, again, pragmatism often doesn't think carefully enough about what we even mean by reality. And the transformative paradigm says reality can never just be discovered. So what we're going to do is look for versions of reality that serve social justice. I don't know if that means something to people, but let's go on to the next slide. Fine. So now look at this. This is Hess Bieber, who's also quite famous in the mixed methods community. She says, well, all these people say, our aim is not necessarily to aim to get closer to the truth, as if there's such a thing as ever being able to find so-called the one truth. The argument is that we're not even trying to develop a coherent picture of so-called reality, because reality is multifaceted, it's open to a variety of interpretations. And as importantly, I've put down here, mixed methods research need not consider that we're trying to simply find out about reality. This is what I put here. We are seeking to create with participants and stakeholders. This is important. Transformative researchers say you have to involve your participants and your stakeholders in thinking through what we mean by reality and what kinds of visions of reality we can create, what kind of versions of reality we are going to talk about, such that it'll be conducive to justice-oriented change. This is the main focus of a transformative paradigm, is that you're trying to use the research process for justice-oriented change. And that means you must actually highlight those versions of reality that are going to be helpful for people who are concerned with creating justice-oriented change. Again, I hope that this means something to people. Let's go one more slide, and then we're going to take some questions from the floor. Let's take one more slide, Ida. Okay, so now this is Mertens again. Remember, I've said Donna Mertens she actually named the transformative paradigm. That's why she's so important. She named it based on other people who had spoken about emancipatory research, critical research, research that is meant to serve social justice. She took all those arguments and put it all into what she called an umbrella called the transformative paradigm. And so because she's the one who labeled the transformative paradigm, she's considered very important. Also, Mertens has been one of the, I think, the few voices in the mixed methods research community that is introducing a transformative paradigm for mixed methods research. Remember, I said earlier that Ongwebuzi and Johnson did that research where they asked so-called big scholars in the field what they think the purpose of MMR is. And most of them said the purpose is to come to a more comprehensive account of reality, or a better picture, or a more complete picture. But Mertens is, I think, one of the few voices in the mixed methods research community that is taking a different take on this issue of what's the purpose of doing MMR. And now, so she's written a lot on mixed methods research from a transformative paradigm point of view. And I believe she's helping to shift a little bit the dominant thinking even within the mixed methods research community, which is really more tending towards thinking we mix methods with the aim of finding out about reality. Mertens says that's not the point of doing research, and it's not even the point of doing mixed methods research. Now, Green, I've listened to her at some workshops at conferences, but in any case, she's one of the advocates of Mertens. She agrees with Mertens on this score, also in the mixed methods community. As I say, there are a few voices in the mixed methods community that take this line. Not everybody does, but Green, also, she's written a nice piece where she says, thanks to the contributions of Donna Mertens and others, who have argued persuasively for using mixed methods in service of transformative and emancipatory intent, questions regarding interests served and value commitments have been kept on the mixed methods radar screen. She's saying if it weren't for Mertens and other people who are advocating for transformative research, it would be off the screen. But she says that thanks to Donna Mertens, now this transformative and emancipatory perspective, and this perspective asks, whose interests are we serving when we do research? And the transformative perspective said we must do research to serve the interests of those most marginalized in the social fabric. As I say, often it's women, it's ethnic groups who've been discriminated against, it's indigenous groups who've been discriminated against, it's people who are poor who've been discriminated against. And so we have to think how we can use research to serve their interests. That is very important. So Mertens refers to the primary allegiance of transformative researchers to these people. And she has no qualms in admitting that this is her value commitment. She calls it her axiology. I don't know if you know that word. So apart from ontology and epistemology, I see one of our questions was about ontology and epistemology. Mertens says axiology is very important. And axiology is, how do we regard values in the research process? We can't forget that we have to think about our own values and link those to social justice intent. Let's see one more slide, and otherwise we'll start with questions. One more slide, Ida. Okay, we're not going to go here. Let's ask some questions now. I see there were lots. So Ida, you can tell me which ones you think I should start with, I think that's important that we use this process now to take questions from the audience before we go on to designs.
All right. There are some questions. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. The first question from Malik. This is very technical. Actually, the question is, what if the findings gathered from one method contradicts to the findings of another?
Okay,
so,
let me take that one immediately. And that's a very important question. I'll take them one by one because they may be very different. But this is a very important question. Now, the mixed method research community, there's a lot of discussion in the mixed methods research community around this concept. I don't know if you've heard it. It's called triangulation. And originally, the word triangulation meant that you're trying to so-called triangulate different vantage points in order to come up with a coherent understanding of reality. And it comes from apparently navigation, the ships, when they wanted to find out where they are on the sea, then they take 3 different points. And based on the 3 different points, they then can find out exactly where they are in the sea. So you know, when they're traveling in the sea in their ships. So triangulation was associated with that metaphor of being able to find out where you are, that there's one answer. You are at this position in the sea. There's actually one answer to where you are. And you can find out the answer by triangulating from different perspectives. Now, in the mixed methods research community, lots of people also say we are mixing methods with the aim of triangulation, meaning we use one method in order to try and confirm the results of another. So for instance, let's say what my original example about gender, we're using questionnaires, or we can maybe use you know, the documents from firms to find out whether women in the same position in the firm are earning more or less than men. And then we can find out, let's just say, the findings show that women are earning less, let's just say. Then we go out and we start interviewing managers, let's just say. And we found out the managers say, well, you know, women can't really do their job so well. They're not as careful with their work. And the other problem is they always have to go home to look after their children, and they're taking work off all the time for their family commitments. So women don't really do the job so well. And that's why, you know, in the end, as it happens, we don't pay them so much. Let's just say that's what the managers say. Let's just say, of course, we don't know exactly. I'm just making this up. But now you can see that the findings from the one type of method, which is your quantitative, you know, picking up the income levels and relating it to gender, would match with the findings of what these managers say, because the managers are now confirming, yes, we don't feel that the women are doing so well, and that's why we don't give them bonuses, and we don't regard them as highly, so we can't think of giving them bonuses, and that's why they earn less. So now the findings are coherent. The one set of findings matching the second set of findings. But now let's just say, which is what this question is asking, you've got contradictory findings. So let's just say that, yes, you found out the women earn less, but now you go and you ask the managers, and the managers say, no, it's not that women are earning less, it's that they're not doing the same kind of work. So although it looks on paper from the numbers that the women doing the same kind of work are earning less, actually they're not doing the same kind of work. This isn't the same work. The men are doing extra, you know, analysis. If they're doing research, they're doing more sophisticated analyses, and the men are holding more meetings. And although it looks like the same kind of work on paper, it's not the same kind of work. And therefore, that is the reason why it looks like the women are earning less, but actually if we look more carefully, that's not the case. Now you can see that there's a kind of contradiction, because the numbers show the women are earning less, but now the managers that you've interviewed are saying, no, they're not earning less, it's just that they're doing less work. So therefore, you know, we can't consider that they're earning less for the same kind of work. So now there's contradictory findings. Now, in the mixed methods research community, there's a lot of discussion about so-called convergent and divergent findings. And now the argument in the mixed methods research community is that, all right, let's take it that although the aim was triangulation maybe to start with, we realize that we can't triangulate that. And even if we try to triangulate, we're going to run into difficulties because there may be divergent findings. So we can't use the one method just to confirm the other method, because we might arrive at divergent findings. So what do? So now a lot of researchers in the mixed methods research community say, now we as researchers have to try and somehow interpret why there are these different findings. And that's the stage of so-called interpretation. You know, we've collected the data, we've analyzed the data, we've seen, we've collected, we've analyzed the survey, we've analyzed our interviews, and now we need to try and interpret this divergence. And they say it's the job of the researcher to find some kind of explanation for the divergence. And it doesn't really matter what explanation is given, as long as it helps us to think more carefully about the research issue here. You know, now we realize that managers believe that women are earning less because they're doing less. So we've still found out something. You see what I mean? Even though it diverges from the findings are not convergent with the quantitative, but we've learned something. We've learned that on paper, women earn less, and we've learned that the managers think that it's justified. So we've still learned something, even though the results are divergent. And that is how lots of mixed methods people say we can cope with divergent findings, and we mustn't worry if findings are divergent, as long as we can say we've still come to some kind of better understanding of social reality. But now, in the transformative perspective, now this is important, in the transformative perspective, what you're doing is you are discussing the findings with the people, because you want to help to create transformation. So for instance, let's say these managers now say to you, no, well, the women are doing less because, you know, we can't give them the same amount because they're looking after their family and they're going home a lot of the time and they've always got problems that they must handle at home. So we can't give them the same kind of money. Now your job as a transformative researcher is to start questioning that way of seeing things and to raise it as an issue. Why are the men not seeing themselves that it's their job also to look after children? Why are the men not considering that it's important that they also take off work in order to look after children when they're ill? Why is it that it's the woman's responsibility? So the transformative research, I know that your one person right in the beginning asked about gender transformation. The transformative perspective will now start to hold workshops even in that particular workplace with the managers, with the men, with the women, and talk through this issue of why they are, the women, if it has been found from the quantitative, why the women are earning less. Start talking through how can we find a way forward to deal with this issue. Should we be giving men officially time off to look after children also? What solutions can we find so that it's not falling on the women all the time, and therefore the managers are thinking, you know, women aren't as committed to their work. So we're looking for solutions which is going to help us to change the setup. We're not just trying to find an interpretation, like I said earlier. We're not even trying to think whether these findings are convergent or divergent. Yes, they may be convergent, they may be divergent, but more important is that we are using the research process for transformative ends. And that's why Donna Mertens says You must involve the participants. In this case, we would have been interviewing women and men and also giving them questionnaires to fill in. We would have been interviewing the managers. Now we involve these participants and we involve all the relevant stakeholders in order to think through way proceeding that is going to make a difference to the lives of the people who we believe as researchers have been socially marginalized. See, this is the point, that the transformative perspective doesn't pretend to be value-free. It does say, why is it that women have been given like second-class citizenship in this firm? Why is it that the managers are thinking they're not doing their job so well just because they have to look after children? So the transformative researchers don't mind admitting that they are on so-called the side of the people who've been marginalized in the social fabric. And now they start raising these concerns with the relevant people. And what I once asked Donna Mertens, I said to her at a workshop, what happens when you talk to people who are in so-called positions of power, like the managers, maybe who can set the salaries, and they're not interested in talking to you and they don't want to make changes? She said, there are always people, even in positions of power, who are going to be willing to listen to a different perspective. She said, you have to seek them out. And those are the people who you will be inviting now to your workshops, to your meetings, to discuss ways forward. If you find managers who say, I'm not interested in this, you know, this is not of interest to me, then obviously you're not going to try and include them. But you'll find people in the social arena who will be interested in making more gender equality, let's say, including managers. So the transformative researcher says, let me find people who are going to be willing to help think through prospects for social change on the basis of the research that we're busy doing. So I hope that answers your question. We're not so interested in whether the results confirm or don't confirm each other, you know, from the different methods. We're more in, and we're not as researchers going to try and think of an explanation for either the convergence or the divergence. What we're going to be doing is looking for transformation. That is the focus of transformative researchers. Does that answer your question?
Okay, would you like to take another one, or you prefer to continue your slide first?
Do you think so? I think let's get one more question, Ida.
There's another question asking about the, is there any strategy about the how to do the analysis, whether there is a proper
How to do the what? How to do what?
Analysis of the data, whether we have to the proportion of the quantitative and qualitative data.
Okay, I understand. So now, in fact, I will turn to this slide that's in front of us, because this is exactly this answer to that question. Okay. The proportion of quantitative and qualitative data. This is a design question. Okay, each method can undermine each other. Okay, it's analyze huge data of Mexesa can undermine each other. All right. Okay, yes, that's right. And I just want to quickly see this person. Sorry, Ida, I like that person who said there's so much data they can undermine each other. I like that point. I want to quickly deal with that point, because a lot of people say, especially in the transformative research tradition, and in what this thing called community operational research, which is actually a big movement in the system sciences. And they say that you've also got to be careful if you're trying to use research for transformative ends, not to obfuscate the issues with too much mystification. That means that you as a professional researcher come up with these very complicated analyses that no one understands even how you got there. So actually in the transformative tradition, they say, be a bit careful of, as a researcher, becoming too sophisticated with your analyses, and that you have got huge amounts of data that then you try and make sense of. But you've left the community behind. They don't understand how you even came to your findings. And lots of people say, you know, we know statistics can lie. So you as a researcher can play around with the data and come up with some statistics, and you know that sentence, that statistics can lie. Even lots of positivists know that statistics can lie. So we've got to be careful of this, having a huge amount of data that we put through all these very complicated statistical techniques, and the community is completely mystified because these statistics are obfuscating the issues that they think are important. So this person who said, you know, that you can have a huge amount of data that can undermine each other, the point again in transformative research is to try and use the data and even analyze it partly in relationship to what's important to participants. So you're not going to come up with all these complicated analyses that you find as a researcher are important. You're actually going to ask the participants to help you in deciding how to deal with this huge amount of data, such that it's going to actually help again for transformative ends. So even the analysis is going to involve participants. It's never just researcher controlled. That is the point. And this person who said that the different kinds of data can undermine each other, yes, but what you're doing is now holding meetings with participants and stakeholders to discuss together what use you can make of the data, so that it's not that the data are undermining each other, it's that you are coming together to think through what to do with all this data, you see, as a basis for next steps forward. So that's just answering that person who said, what if the data undermine each other? It doesn't matter. You now bring your participants together to think through ways forward in relation to these data that maybe seem contradictory. What are ways forward? That is the point, that you're looking for ways forward with participants and stakeholders. You're not just as a researcher controlling everything. Now, this other question is about how you deal with decide on the proportion of quantitative and qualitative data. Good. Now, the way in which you can do this is there are different designs. This is all understood in the mixed methods research community, that you can have designs that are so-called dominant quantitative, and that means that there's going to be more focus on the quantitative data and on quantitative analyses. You can also have designs, it's understood within the mixed method community, they all understand that, you know, not all designs are the same. You can have dominant quant, which means you'll give more preference to the quantitative, or you can have dominant qual, which means you'll give more preference to the qualitative, right? So you'll be less concerned with giving very in-depth analyses of the quantitative data. You're going to be more interested in exploring the meaning of all the different terms and the different categories and the relationships with the participants. So that would be called dominant qual. Or you can try for equal status. And I see your person says, you know, how do you decide? Well, again, this decision as to whether it'll be dominant quant or dominant qual or try for equal status, as a transformative researcher, those decisions are never just made by the so-called professional researcher. You might go in the community and they really want an in-depth survey, and they want to know how many women in how many workplaces are earning less than men, let's just say. They want a really detailed quantitative account of the earnings of women versus men for what we consider to be, or what may be considered to be, the same kind of work. So then let's say you're speaking to women and they really, really want to know this. They want the quantitative information so that they can maybe then, you know, do their advocacy work for changing this income inequality. So they may want dominant quant. Your people, remember I said in the transformative paradigm, you're more interested in serving people who've been historically marginalized. So now, because the women you're speaking to say, we want these surveys across, you know, 20 firms, then you have to, your design is going to be dominant quant. And that means that your analysis of data is going to be dominantly quant. You might still have some qual because it's a mixed method design. So you may do a couple of interviews with some managers from these firms and find out why, how they're explaining the discrepancy, you know, in income, or how they're explaining how they attribute salaries to women and men, and how they decide on the salary of women and men, and how they decide on the work that the women and men will do. You will speak to a couple of managers, and you might speak to a couple of women and men also, because you want to do some interviews with the relevant participants. So you will do interviews, but as I say, in such a case, your participants who you feel allegiance to, which is in this case maybe the women, have asked for dominant quant, so you'll give that the most status. You see, that's how you would answer the question. But alternatively, you may get people who say, you know, these statistics and these analysis of income is not that important. We want to know what's going on in the minds of these managers when they attribute salaries to women, and how does it affect the way in which women and men interact in the firm if they know that they're earning different salaries, and how does it affect the way in which they see their work and the commitment they give to their work. We're more interested in the viewpoints of the participants. So that would become a dominant qual, you see, and then your analysis of the data is also going to be dominant qual. But as I say, you're going to take your cue from the participants. You see, it's not as a researcher that you decide dominant quant, dominant qual, or equal status. If your participants may say, we're interested in both. We want the data, numerical data, and we want to know what's going on in the minds of these people and how they're interacting and how they're negotiating salaries, etc., etc. So then you'll give equal status to each type of approach or each type of method. So that's the answer to that question. I hope I've answered that question well enough. Should I move on to continue with my slides, or should we take one more question in between?
I think it's better to continue your slide because
okay. So I've answered the question about oh no, I don't know. We go back again, Ida. I've only answered it. Yes, that's right. I've only answered the first two lines. That question was about the first two lines of the slide. How do you decide what to give most preference to when you analyze the data? So my answer in short is you'll liaise with the participants. Now, and with stakeholders, they also will be involved in deciding that answer. Now, in terms of designs of mixed methods research, there's also what is called sequential or parallel use of methods. Sequential means you do it in sequence. So you'll start with one method, and then on the basis of the answers you found when you did the one method, you'll move on to the next method. So let's stick to this gender example. You might start off with a questionnaire or with collecting information from the firms as to salaries. And so that's your quantitative first. Now you've picked up some information. Now you go and start interviewing women, men, and managers. That would be called that you found out something, or you think you found out something, or you've analyzed some of the data from the quantitative. So you've dealt with the analysis of the quantitative. Now on that basis, you start developing questions to ask the women and the men and the managers, let's say. So you do that, the questionnaire, whatever it is, first. You analyze it, and based on what you so-called discover or what comes through from the quantitative, you now develop questions that you think, I'm going to ask the managers about this. I'm going to ask the women about this. I'm going to ask about this. You see, so you define your qualitative based on what you found in the quantitative. That's called sequential. Note, you can also do it oh no, I won't say that yet. Let's continue with the sequential issue. But now, again, what I've said, what I'm trying to stress through this whole presentation is that you can do it sequentially, and later I'll discuss what it means to do it in not sequentially, and also other examples. But what's important is that no matter how you approach it, whether you do the one first and then the second, or whether you do it, it's called in parallel, meaning you set up a questionnaire, and at the same time, you go and interview people. So, you know, while they're busy filling in the questionnaire, at the same time, you're going and talking to them. That's called parallel, that you don't wait for the findings from the first in order to inform the second step. But the point about transformative research is that no matter what steps you take and how you do it, whether you do it in sequence or in parallel, and whether you do the quantitative first and then the qual, or the qualitative first and then the quant, or whether you do them both at the same time, what's important is that all the steps must support transformative intent. And that means that your intention of using the research is what's important. It's not so important whether you start off with quant and go to qual, or start off with qual and go to quant, or use the two together. What you are interested in is that your research is going to be helpful ultimately to create what's called justice-oriented change. Change which is going to become that the society or the workplace or the whatever you're exploring is more equitable. So any question you ask in your questionnaire, even any data you're collecting on salaries, let's say, any questions you ask in the women and the men, that ultimately you're doing it with the purpose of bringing people together to think through how they can move forward in more transformative direction. So, you know, as I say, in the mixed method community, you can look up, there are hundreds of designs of how you use sequential and how you use this one first and that one first, or that one first and that one first, or both in parallel. There are many, many designs. And I once read again Mertens, which I found interesting, which I quoted in my book. She said, don't even worry what your design is. Just tell the readers when you're writing up your research what you did. Don't try and class it as whether you did it, you know, whether you used this kind of design, they've all got different names, or whether you use that kind of design, this type of explanatory sequential and that kind of exploratory sequential, and you know, they've all got different names. She says, don't worry about that. You just tell your reader what you did. You know, you did a questionnaire, you asked these kind of questions, you looked up information on the firm, the way they're giving salaries, and that's how you did it. You asked the managers for their records and they agreed, and blah, blah, blah. Then you interviewed people, and these were the kinds of questions you asked them, blah, blah, blah. And then you held workshops. And more important, she says in your write-up, you're going to explore how the research was interventionist. I don't know if you know that word. It's a new word, but Mertens, not really a new word in this presentation, but Mertens is very keen on what she calls intervention. That means you're using the research not just to stop and say, I've done research, here's my findings. You're doing research with, it's called interventionist intent. You're trying to intervene in social life in order to make a difference. And I'm not going to mention this project because we, funnily enough, are going to run out of time, which you know, can always happen. So I'm not going to mention, but that's what we did in, was called a 500 Schools project, where we created questionnaires to help define themes for focus groups, that would be sequential, and then later for interventions, that would be sequential. But Ida, can you go, and then as I say, you can do it the other way around. Can you go on to the next slide, Ida? Now, yes, I'm not going to, well, I'll quickly say this one, that what's important when you're doing, if you ever do questionnaires, is that you are doing, when you construct your questionnaires, you are trying to create questions that are meaningful to the participants. So again, it's not researcher controlled, it's that you as a researcher will also be interested in how the participants are seeing the categories that you're using in the research. I'll quickly go into this one. It's a very nice example of a person in South Africa called Naidu is her name. She was researching women's reproduction choices, how and when to pace their births. And she said every evening they actually cross-checked the surveys and even the way in which they were posing questions against what they were finding out when they did field work. They were doing things in parallel in that case. And she said, what's interesting, they discovered, you know, on the questionnaire, they were asking people, are you married? And they discovered that that category of marriage didn't mean anything to the woman. It was more important how their partner was interacting with them, whether their partner was supportive, whether the partner was maybe working elsewhere and therefore wasn't available to help with child care, whether the partner, showed interest in helping with the childcare work. That was far more important to them than the category of marriage. So although on the questionnaire originally they were asking women, are you married? Later they realized that's not even an important category as far as the women were concerned when they were making reproduction choices. So they started shifting the questionnaire. But let's go on to the next slide, Ida. The next slide. The next slide is going to be a different way of doing sequential, which is that you might start with focused groups and then I'm going to keep talking. Okay, it wasn't, yes, let's get on to the next one, Ida, because I've kind of discussed this. It's about dialogue around results is essential. I saw popping up on the screen, someone asked if he or she does quant and then moves to qual. Can they use the quant to inform the qual? Yes, you can do that. But what's most important is that at the end of the day, you're going to have dialogue with the participants. That was just an answer to that person that I saw a question popping up on the screen. Now, I want to quickly show another example of sequential. And for this, I'm going to actually use not the example that I have on here. I'm going to use another nice example, which, because you've mentioned about Janet McIntyre-Mills, and she also gave a seminar on this series. And when I was writing my book, I used a lot of her example. Oh, my throat. I used a lot of her example of where she was researching climate change and climate change responses. Because, by the way, although the transformative paradigm doesn't give so much credibility to environmental justice, Mertens originally started off with the issue of social justice, but Indigenous authors focus a lot on the issue of environmental justice. Indigenous authors means people who've been previously colonized, and they are very concerned with our relationship with the ecosystem and with ecological life. And so although Mertens doesn't focus so much on environmental issues, although in her later writing she does, because she's learned from Indigenous authors. She actually wrote to me once and said she's learned about that from Indigenous authors, that she's also got to stress environmental issues. But what Janet did in Janet McIntyre-Mills, she spoke on this series once, and you'll see the references also. So don't worry about this particular slide. It's just another example of sequential, which is about using focus groups and then moving on to a survey. But the way Janet did it in the climate change issue, I think Janet's listening here, hopefully, the way that she did it is she ran focus groups with people to start with. And this was to define areas of interest. In this case, it was to define scenarios of how people might deal with climate change. For instance, you can do what she called business as usual, where you just pretend that climate change is not a big issue and you just carry on with business as usual. Or you can have a scenario where you think, yes, we need to worry about climate change, but we can slowly change our habits. That's called a slow change. I've forgotten the exact word Janet used. And then the other one is more radical intervention, where the people in the focus group realize that we're in crisis mode, and now we've got to really have a much more radical way of seeing change. And that was called the radical scenario. Again, I can't remember Janet's exact words, but it was basically business as usual, small changes, and then radical change. So she set up focus groups to define the way in which people could see climate change. And then she did what's called an interactive survey, which again, I discussed her in my book on transformative research. I discussed this example in depth because she used her survey also for transformative ends. In other words, she asked people to join the survey. It was an interactive survey, I mean, it was online. And people could join in and see each other's answers, although it was anonymous, so they didn't know who these other people were. But they were seeing ideas from other people. And because they were seeing ideas from other people, they were also sharing their ideas with other people and thinking through options again for things that could be done. Ultimately, it was going to be given to a local government. So they wanted to help the local government to realize how their local government could support people in efforts for climate change. And so this interactive survey was actually immediately serving transformative ends. People were learning from each other what were possibilities. For example, community gardens, they were learning about this. They were learning where the gardens were. They were learning how they can set up a community garden. They were sharing stories. They were discussing what's important, for instance, in cycling, you know, that they need cycle paths or whatever. So the interactive survey was asking people questions, but at the same time helping people to reflect on their life choices, because the whole idea was to help people to think through the consequences of their choices. You see, so it was transformative in the sense it was helping people to reflect on their choices. And ultimately it went to the local government, who too were able to see what was important to people in the community and what they needed in terms of support from the local government. So that would be another example of sequential. But note that all the time from a transformative point of view, you're interested in using the research process for transformative ends with participants and stakeholders. In Janet's case, it was the participants joining the focus groups and the interactive survey, and the stakeholders was the people in the local government. Okay, I think, yes, I hope I've answered enough people's questions. I just saw one person asking about objectivity, and that's an important point I want to make. Transformative researchers say there's no such thing as doing research from an objective point of view. There's no ways in which we can forget that as researchers, we are also people. And as people, we do have values. And Donna Mertens says she does not apologize for the fact that she brings her own values to the research process. Her value is to support people who've been marginalized. And as I say, another value, which she later introduces, is to support nature, who's also been marginalized, and you know, because we've been exploiting nature basically for purposes of business profit. And that is what Janet McIntyre Mills also stresses in her books on systemic ethics, that you're trying to help to make better relationships between people, and you're trying to make a more harmonious relationship with nature. That is your value. So you're not trying to be objective. I just saw popping up on the screen, one person asked about objectivity. Ida, have we got more time for more questions? Before that, I just want to say these were examples of sequential, but parallel would be where you do things at the same time, that you don't do the one method in order to inform the next, but you simply do things at the same time, and then you as a researcher, you look at the findings and you bring it together. But again, in transformative research, if you do things in parallel, meaning you use your questionnaires at the same time as you use your interviews, then you bring things together, but with the participants and stakeholders. That's the most important thing. Whether you use your method sequentially or in parallel, ultimately you want to bring together your participants and your stakeholders to think through the importance of the research and how to move forward in terms of action.
Okay. Well, would you like to continue your lecture?
I can. You know, this, I've said more or less as much as I needed to say, but let's see the next slide.
Yeah.
Yes, this was a parallel one that I was just saying now, that it's if you do it in parallel, you use, you know, your both methods in parallel, that you don't use one to inform the other. If you do it in parallel, then you'll bring the phases together at the point of analyzing and interpreting. So collecting data will be in parallel, and at the point of analyzing and interpreting, you'll bring the different phases together. But note again, I've said we don't need to seek coherence. That was that one person who said about the contradictions who asked earlier. We don't need to worry about that. More interesting is, how do we bring the participants and stakeholders to write into the findings and the stories? So if there's contradictory findings, let's bring the people together to think through what it means on the level of action. And actually, just recently, I published another nice article with a person from Vietnam called Hoang. I met her at a conference on climate change, actually, but she did a wonderful research project on, you know, how she brought together participants in meetings and workshops to find ways forward in relation to the different findings that had been discovered in earlier phases of the research. The idea in transformative research is to encourage dialogue across different perspectives. So even if there's lack of coherence, it doesn't matter. How do people make sense of this, and how does it help them to think of negotiating ways forward for action? Let's see the next one.
Okay.
Okay, this is just another slide, a person called Poin who spoke about that designs can evolve, meaning you don't have to think that you've developed a design and now you must stick to that design. She's saying in mixed methods research, adapt the design as you go along. Don't worry about the fact that you're changing course in the process of the research. Don't think you have to plan your study perfectly in advance and have a definite design. You can, she calls it a complexity sensitive approach, which understands that innovation will take place along the way. So this is just about evolving designs or emergent designs. And it's a lady called Poin. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Is this the one?
Okay. Another point I wanted to make is that when you're doing a mixed methods research, you can also be creative in the kinds of methods you use. For instance, you don't have to use the normal ones, which is like questionnaires and surveys and interviews and focus groups. You can use proverbs as a way to stimulate people to think morally. For instance, what's the purpose of this proverb? It helps people to reflect again on moral intent and what they want to do in terms of creating a better life in the society. You can use photo voice. This example that I've put here, Notchelwana and De Lange, is a lovely one for that person who asked about gender transformation. If you look up this one that you'll see by Notchelwana and De Lange, it's all about using photo voice to help people to reflect on gender categories. The researchers actually asked these women to look at their photo albums from the past with new eyes now in relation to gender issues. And very interesting, the way they had to create a new photo album, now focusing on gender issues, and then they discussed it with each other, and they thought of ways forward of how they can rethink gender issues, also in relationship to their students who they were teaching. And then you'll see a nice quote from McIntyre, Mills and me, which is that McIntyre, Mills, who I just mentioned earlier, saying you incorporate different ways of knowing. So it's not just that, you know, you're thinking of so-called rational ways and empirical explanations. You are including social, cultural, spiritual, instinctive ways of people in knowing, like, as I say, even the proverbs they may use, and culturally how they're regarding the web of relations in which they're involved, and also their web of relations with ecology. So you're using many forms of knowing in transformative research. You're not sticking to the so-called traditional methods. And the next one, Ida. All right, this I've already mentioned about the environmental justice, and you'll see this quote, but I've mentioned about environmental justice, that Indigenous authors say it's very important to also seek environmental justice in order to live more ethically in our relationships with each other and with the environment. And the next one might be the last one.
Yeah.
Right, this is my final note. As a researcher, you might want to theorize, you know, that so-called researchers' main capacity is that they're able to theorize, they look at literature, they see theories, they change theories, they adapt theories, they make new theories. But what I'm just making the point here is you don't need to remove your theorizing from participants' understandings. The idea is to share and discuss ideas with participants as part of the process of theorizing. And then, yes, you can share it with other scholars so that they can use it for developing frameworks to guide their studies. And transformative researchers say when we're developing theories, we must have, they call it non-deficit theories. For instance, theories of inclusive education, which don't just individualize learners who've got so-called barriers to learning, which would be a deficit account of learners. So you must develop theories which are supportive of these people who've normally been marginalized in the social fabric. Asset-based theoretical approaches for community development. These are the kind of theories that you focus on people's strengths and not their deficits. And I think when you came to South Africa, Ida, and you were talking about the way in which you were doing research, you were also using asset-based approaches of community development. Try and find the strengths in the community, the strengths that people have, and build on those. So that was your theoretical approach as far as I understood it. And that's my final note, that you can theorize, you can share with other scholars, but make it that it's grounded in participants' understandings, that you've been sharing ideas with participants, and also that you are using your theorizing to support the strengths that you're finding in communities and in social life. All right, so I've been through my slides. And I've answered a few questions along the way, which I'm pleased about. I just hope people have benefited, and I'm available for more questions if people want to ask.
Okay, thank you very much, Norma. Actually, there are some more questions, but I'm concerned about the time constraint. Actually, we set up this event until 5 p.m. and it is almost already 5 past. But I think that it is okay for you. We can have at least answer 2 questions. Is that okay for you? Before
That's
we close?
good. Let's take 2 questions. You can choose ones you think are very good ones.
Okay. Well, the question is, one question is asking whether if there is too many big data, if the researcher finding actually the very large amount of data, is it possible to present the qualitative and quantitative data separately, or we still have to combine both of the data analysis?
All right, I can answer that one quite easily. If you are trying to present it to like a journal audience, then I know lots of people say, take different components of the research and you can present your quantitative. In other words, you say to the reader of your journal, because, you know, journals like 6,000 words, more or less, it's often not easy to, present all the findings. So I have seen a lot of people say in the journal that, you know, this was a mixed method study, it did quantitative, it did qualitative, and here's the quantitative. And you can make a brief reference to the qualitative, and you can just say this is explored in a further article, and explain what will be discussed in the further article. And you might give a brief account of how you combined, or whether the quantitative, like someone said earlier, did it converge or contradict the qualitative? Was there divergence or convergence? Just give a brief account, but then explain the quantitative in one article, and then in your next article you explain the qualitative, and again you say you've discussed the quantitative in that one, and blah blah blah, and then you say this article concentrates on the qual. So you say what the design was, and you give a brief indication of whether the findings were convergent or divergent, and if it's transformative research, you give a brief indication of how people managed to make use of the findings and what it helped them, if at all, hopefully, for forward action, and then you'll just focus in on the qual. But there's an important point I forgot to mention, which it doesn't quite relate to this, although it partly relates to this. What's very important when you do transformative research, get feedback from your participants as to whether they thought the research was helpful for them. Did it help them to think through ideas? Did it help them to think through ways of acting differently in relation with others? Did it help in generating new ideas within the context in which you're operating? Like, let's say that workplace where I said you would bring people together to discuss the income disparity. Ask for feedback from the different people, the women, the men, the managers. Ask for feedback wherever you are. If you're doing research on anything, on gender, on climate change. Even I suggested to Janet and Rudolph, who are continuing with that research on climate change, that they have a question in their interactive survey at the end, asking people how they experience the survey and whether they've learned and what they've learned and how will it help them to think through their choices. So ask for feedback from participants, because when you write up research, you actually, I found I easily can get published because I can explain to the reader how I've involved participants. And with transformative research, that is your whole point. You want to involve the participants. So, and you're trying to create visions that will lead to change. So if you can get feedback from participants, it really helps you to write up your transformative research. But as I say, in terms of whether you can do your articles in you know, different, first focus on the other and then the one or whatever, that is feasible. But I suggest in all cases, end off your article with the feedback. And therefore do research such that you're asking for feedback. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Norma. I think, would you like to take another one, or you just
the other one is good?
Okay, the last one. I think this is actually very quick question on, is it possible to create a new knowledge from the transformative research method?
Okay. Now, the point is that the transformative research method says new knowledge means new visions of how we can proceed in the social world to make transformation. So, like I said earlier, like let's say you get, even you, Ida, you know, you wrote with Donna Mertens that one article. You
Yes.
could call that new knowledge, but the new knowledge is based on trying to give accounts of what's possible in the social world. Where are the constraints, but where are the possibilities for action? Based on definite involvement in trying to create action. So your new knowledge is meant to inspire new action. And your new knowledge is meant to also show other people, like other scholars, how you can inspire action and where the constraints may be and how you might try to deal with constraints, how you sidestep them. You know, like I said, once I was at a workshop with Donna Mertens and I said to her, what do you do when the people in power aren't interested in change? She said, you'll always find people will be interested, even people who occupy positions of power. So that is actually new knowledge, because it's saying that you don't need to think to yourself that you're fully constrained by your marginalized position. You can network with people in your own community. You can try and find people who are in positions of power in the society who will be willing to support you. And you can give examples of all of that. This is all new knowledge, how in action you can manage to make a difference. So your new knowledge must always be knowledge around possibilities for action. And as I say, there's many write-ups of research in this direction, and that I would all call new knowledge.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Norma. I'm still keen to listen to your lectures. However, unfortunately, it is very late here in Indonesia.
But this is actually my final note. This was my last slide. Yes. So I did, in fact, finish the slides, but I could take, of course, many more questions. But I think we've covered the main issues.
Yes, I think everything already covered. And I would like also to just move this slide and sharing to the participant about the reference. So we will share I think, is it okay to share your presentation to the participants, Norma?
Yes, idea, share the presentation, and no problem, that'll be good. And this person who asked about new knowledge, if you read any of these articles, you'll find some new knowledge that has been developed from transformative research.
Okay, so there are some reference in her PowerPoint presentation, and we will post it on our website. You can visit our website and you'll find it. And you also can listen to this presentation in our YouTube channel later. And also, if you want to know more about the transformative research ideas, you can read some of the books written by Norma Rom. And you can find her in the Google Scholars website site as well as ResearchGate. So this is actually her biodata. She's a research professor in the Department of Adult Basic Education and Youth Development, the University of South Africa. So there's some so many books she wrote. You can follow her ideas and writing in on those books, and also some articles. I think this is the end of our sessions. Professor Norma, thank you very much for being with us. And I also thanks the participants. Actually, we also have some of my colleagues from Flinders University, the alumni of Flinders University who's working as researchers and also lecturers from Padang as well as from Papua. So actually we have very diverse participants now. My students also, I noticed them coming. We also have other colleagues from our faculties, Pak Budi and also Pak Heru, the one who actually came and met you in the symposium back in 2017. Once again, thank you very much, Norma, for being with us. And Ibu Erna, would you like to say something before we close the session?
Well, we have to say thank you a lot to Professor Norma Rom for this important session, and also for taking your time with us today. Maybe we should organize another one with you later, because people are very keen with their questions and they don't have enough time to post it in this webinar. So thank you very much for your time and your presentations today.
Yes, I'm quite happy to hold another session just based on questions. That would be also interesting for me. I'm pleased a few people managed to ask questions today, because that helped me to see what people's interests were. But yes, we can certainly organize another one if you wish, based on just questions.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe a kind of workshop about mixed method will be good later. Yeah.
And for the participants, actually, we also will have Donna Mertens to talk and to be with us to discuss the transformative research on the 3rd of August. So be with us, but it will be conducted very early in the morning, because Donna is in Washington, DC. So it will be very late for her, but very early morning for us. So, but it is very difficult to find time. With you, it is a bit okay, because only 5 hours difference, but with Norma, it is 11 hours different. So on the 3rd of August, we will share the information on the next webinar. And thank you very much for all the participants to be with us. And hopefully you can have some insights from this webinar. Okay, thank you very much, Norma, and we will see you soon.
Okay. My pleasure. Thank you for organizing.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.